Hi friends, welcome to this special edition of the Nationalist View, and in today's podcast we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Swapan Kataria. Swapan ji, welcome. And Swapan Kataria ji is CEO and co-founder of CrownLNG. He is also the chairman of the carbon capture company. And so today we are going to have a conversation about a lot of interesting issues which are of great relevance in global context and especially in the Indian context. So Mr. Kataria, tell me something about your journey. You are basically, as far as I know, you were born in India, but now you are kind of a global figure, especially in the field of energy. So tell us something about yourself and your journey.
First of all, Arunji, thank you for spending some time with me and giving me the opportunity to express my views. Yes, I was born and brought up in India, and education took me out of India, and then business got me staying there. And then slowly, as our oil and gas trading grew for, I'd say, a little over 31 years, we started looking at the global landscape from an infrastructure standpoint, especially from a natural gas perspective. I think it was important for a trader to stabilize themselves. We had to look for infrastructure. So in order to look for infrastructure opportunities, we looked at the export of LNG molecules from the United States. And I think if you look at our infrastructure journey, or really Crown's journey, where it began, I think it started its first day in the United States of America, because the US had an up and coming LNG market at the time. This was back in 2013, 2014, almost 10 or 11 years ago. And we could see that, United States would become one of the largest suppliers of natural gas in the world. What we did not know is that it will control such a big part of it as it does today. And we started developing a project in the offshore sector in the Gulf of Mexico, which now is called Gulf of America. And what we realized very soon was that it's a hurricane zone. And when you have a hurricane coming in, and if you're developing something offshore, and if you're developing especially on a floating barge solution, it cannot operate in those kinds of winds and waves. And that's what brought us to a gravity-based structure in Norway. And I think somewhere in 2016, we decided that, okay, we are going to build our projects on gravity-based structure from Norway, because it can take harsh weather condition. It can at least give access to those communities which need gas, or they want to sell gas, but they're not able to on traditional technologies. So we are not building things on land, which is the conventional way. We are not building things on water in a floating barge, which is a very common way to do it. We're actually going into those gaps where none of these can operate. And if you look at east coast of India, it is one of those opportunities, because 5 out of the 6 major rivers of India, they end up in the east coast basin, creating a lot of silt over the years. So it's very difficult to find a very deep landfall point. And if you wanted to create a big port there, you have to dredge a very long channel. And then when you start calculating the cost of dredging, it becomes unviable to put an LNG project. But if you do a floating barge solution, it's very difficult to operate 365 days because of the typhoon season. So when you introduce a gravity-based structure into the mix, it can operate 365 days. You don't need to dredge. You don't need to disturb anything in the port. In fact, it actually helps decongesting the ports in a way, because it will remain offshore. It will operate 365 days without giving any sort of exposure or big infrastructure change to the port itself.
So sir, when you say the LNG projects, so for a layman or for a common viewer, if you can explain, what exactly basically is an LNG project. I believe you are doing a project in Kakinada.
Yes.
So what exactly is an LNG project, and what does it do actually basically? Is it producing gas? Are you transporting gas from somewhere else, and you are processing it and then supplying it? So what does, and to what kind of industrial units or to what kind of entities this gas goes?
I think it's a very good question. We in our life are in the natural gas business, so we use words and things we think everybody can understand, but it is important to explain that. So for that you have to understand the value chain of gas. So oil and gas is a natural product We all know that it comes from within the ground or offshore also from under the ground. And then when it comes out, you have to process it. So you have to separate mostly oil and gas, and then the gas has to be cleaned up and put it in a pipeline. Now, if there was gas in a pipeline, try to picture it in Qatar or in Russia or in the United States or in Australia or in Brunei or in Nigeria, how do you bring it to India? You cannot draw a pipeline of gas from there to India. So you have to find a way to transport it. So in order to transport that gas, which is come from an oil or gas field, into the pipeline network of that country, you have to build these LNG facilities which will help liquefy the gas on the other side. It will be carried as a liquid in a ship to its destination country, and then you have what is called a regasification plant, which we are building in Kakinada, which will basically turn that liquid back into gas, and that gas will be pushed into the pipeline network of India. So that gives you a picture, and for the benefit of the viewers, the cost of building these facilities is very high. The technology is as far and few between. Very few companies have it. And it's not easy to build these projects. Not only because of its dollar intensity, it's, I think, more engineering problems. Because if you were to bring 10 of them, you'll probably don't find skilled people to do it, right? And that has been one of our biggest challenges in India also. In order to train people, to create the skill set into construction and also creating this thing. That's why I always say we're not just bringing a project. We're actually bringing an ecosystem, which will actually develop that oil and gas and that ship building or gravity-based structure building opportunities for a very long term in India. So I hope that gives you a little better clarity. Than
I just wanted one more thing, if you can explain that. You talked about gravity-based structure. What exactly is, I believe CrownLNG, they use basically a very unique technology, and which is helping you probably to set up this plant in the East Coast, generally where otherwise the weather conditions are pretty uneven.
Yeah.
And that's why we have not been able to develop too many projects on natural gas there. So what exactly is the technology which you use? If you can break it down a little bit in the layman's language.
It would be a pleasure. So essentially, trying to picture it, it's a concrete structure. So, but a very large concrete structure. So a very large concrete structure which is so heavy, and it's made out of concrete, which will be made in India, by the way. We'll talk a little bit about it. It actually, because of gravity, it sits right on the seabed. And we like calling it an energy island because of that. But once you put it right on the seabed, it doesn't matter how the wave patterns are around. It actually sits there. It doesn't go up and down with waves like a typical floating solution. And on the top of that concrete substructure is where you put the topside plant for regasification and for power plant and for living accommodations, etc. So even when there is a typhoon, for example, the wave height goes to 6 meters. It doesn't matter because the plant is operating because it has the liquid molecules inside its belly. So that is the uniqueness of it. So this is quite heavy, right? It's about 150,000 tons just in concrete and steel when it's empty. And then once you load it up with the full LNG, it comes to about 250,000 tons. So it's very stable. And it can take, we've been through engineering on this and a detailed set of engineering sets. And we feel that, even the worst storm which has ever taken place in the east coast of India, this can handle 3 times of that.
So how many such projects you have been doing in other parts of the world?
So we have a project in Scotland which is under review, and once it starts constructing, it will be probably able to provide about, I'd say, 18% of UK's energy needs. And India is one of them. The other one we are looking at is Vietnam, which we're working, and certainly the United States for export. Because these are all projects in Vietnam or India or Scotland and a few others that we're looking at are all for import of LNG. But United States and Canada, the 2 projects that we're looking at, are actually for export of LNG. So we want to put that value chain together so that we can be able to service the consumers at a better cost.
So if we look at the overall energy consumption scenario in India, so there are a lot of subsidies which the government has to give. There's a lot of import duties which the government pays, and there's a lot of oil which we basically import. So if we look at the overall consumption basket, So how it is going to help India in terms of reducing its cost of energy consumption if we move increasingly towards LNG from oil?
So I think I'll word it a little bit differently, Arunji. I don't think India needs to reduce its oil. I think the demands of India and I should use the right word, demands of growing India are a lot more than what we are being able to service. So to me, I don't think it's a matter of looking at do we need oil or replace it with gas. And I think one of the big elements that everybody thinks about is in the transportation sector. So if you look at diesel, so a big myth that people have is that if LNG comes in and it replaces diesel, then we can reduce a lot of carbon footprint. But I don't think it is that easy to say, because I think diesel, if I compare it on today's prices, is about 18% of Brent pricing, and LNG would probably land somewhere between 25 and 26% of Brent. So is it viable? No, as of today. Can it be viable in the future with a lot of volume and a lot of infrastructure? Yes. Is the government supporting that increase of infrastructure and the cost and the investments into it? I don't think so. So if the government was supporting it, we'll probably be able to achieve this goal in about 5 to 8 years instead of 15 to 20 years. So I hope somebody is listening to this podcast and saying, okay, we need to improve our energy mix. I think Mr. Modi, or our Honorable Prime Minister Modi, he's awesome. He has basically wanting to go step by step. He's increasing our energy mix of gas from 6 to 15%. And I don't see that kind of trickling down into actually building that much infrastructure to be able to serve 15%. But I'm sure there's a method in the madness that he has, because I believe in him. And I certainly hope that the national oil companies and all the bureaucracy, which is implementing this vision of his, is going to speed up to get it done.
So if we look at in terms of the energy security scenario, because it's directly linked to geopolitics, and especially we have seen the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's completely, actually, it has basically kind of upset the complete energy metrics globally. At least that is what people like us who are not into the energy sector so deeply, but look at the geopolitics a little bit closely. So that is what we feel. So how important is our projects like what you are doing in Kakinada in India? So how important are these projects, and especially LNG, in context of stabilizing India's energy security scenario?
So I think, first of all, the upset because of Ukraine and Russia, I think it has helped expose the importance of energy security. And I think it's important. I think it's important for every country, growing country like India, to wake up and say, okay, what is important to us? How do we get there? And how does that trickle down to or come down to the fact that energy is important for national security? Is I personally related to creating jobs for the youth. And jobs can be created through industrialization, and industrialization can only happen if you have stable energy sources. Can we keep running on coal? Yes. Can we increase our penetration on coal? Of course. I'm not saying no to that. But I think if we have to think of it a little bit responsibly, we have to say, okay, does coal create a lot more carbon, or does gas create a lot of carbon? I think Mr. Modi sees that clearly, because his commitment to increase the gas mix. And when you start thinking about increasing gas mix into the Indian energy sources, then you start thinking, where can you get it from? That's where I think it becomes a geopolitical issue, because India doesn't have it, and you have to look at other countries where you can get it from. India buys a lot of gas from Qatar. It's very close to us. It can bring in, but we also understand that Middle East is a very volatile place, and if you cannot depend all your energy needs from there. So does Russia or United States make sense? I think United States makes total sense, because they deliver projects. They have the ability, the engineering prowess, and the funding to make sure that the projects are delivered on time and India is serviced. So if you look at the geopolitics, you draw it down that, okay, what is the deliverability of that? Because ultimately your security will depend on your deliverability of that product. And if you look at the options available to India today, I think America sits right on the top from a perspective of deliverability. You cannot see everything from dollar and cents. Like, one perspective I'll give you, that is my personal perspective, and not from Crown, essentially, is that if we pay, let us say, double the price for energy today, or 20% more, or 30% more, is it worth paying that 30 or 50% more? Or is it worth keeping 35 million youth without a job? I think if you think that for a minute and wear that hat on, and you'll say, cost of energy is really nothing as compared to the energy that we are losing from our youth.
So it's a cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly. So it's a matter of perspective. Sometimes people will look at it 6 out of a 12. Sometimes people will look at it half a dozen. So it's still the same thing. Ultimately, if India needs to grow, we need to increase our industrialization and job profile, and for that we need energy. And can that energy come from oil, or from coal, or from wind, or from solar, or from gas? I think it has to come from all of them. And certainly gas plays a huge role in decarbonization.
So for a country like India, what kind of an ideal mix do you see in terms of the energy basket? So kind of how much of energy should be coming from natural gas broadly? Because I think currently it's not pretty high. So what kind of for an emerging economy, for a country which is growing, which intends to become a developed country by 2047, and as you rightly pointed out, we need to create basically more and more jobs.
Yeah.
So what kind of, if this is again from a very layman's perspective, that what should be our target over the next few years, that okay, this percentage of energy should be coming from natural gas?
I think if you ask me, ideally that number should be 1/4.
Okay.
25% of India's total needs should be gas, right? That's a healthy goal. It can be achieved. I think I'll be dreaming if I tell you 70%, because that'll not happen in probably at least a lifetime. But a realistic goal would be to shoot for 25%. That improves our India's carbonization efforts, or decarbonization efforts. And at the same time, you have to grow other sources. And why I say that is because I think gas and coal both are very good complements to solar and wind. And India is really blessed. India is blessed because India has so much sunlight for solar, right? And that's why we are getting a very good pricing on solar power purchase agreements in India. But solar and wind can only do so much because they cannot operate 24 hours. That's the only downside of it. Now, in those hours when they're not operating, how do you fill that gap? Now, if you had a battery, it would be a perfect world. But we don't have those systems yet. And in the meantime, you have to rely on coal and gas. So the only way to decarbonize that part is to increase gas and reduce coal. So that's why I'm saying if we go to even a healthy target of 25%, it would be pretty good. But right now, I'm pursuing our PM's vision of getting to 15% and being a small part of that.
So you talked about US being right on the top as far as India's option of getting natural gas is concerned, LNG is concerned. So if we look at the Trump 2.0 scenario, and because you extensively travel and you work out of US also,
Yeah.
so how do you see the US being inclined? Okay, India wants it. India would try to have this kind of arrangement with, but Trump 2.0 with the trade wars and the tariff wars, though a lot of things are optics also,
Right.
basically for domestic politics. So how do you see this panning out? What can be done to ensure that there is uninterrupted, undisputed kind of basically increased supply of natural gas from United States to America? And how do you see Trump 2.0 administration? Will they be supporting it? Are they supporting it? How do you, though too early to say, these are early days, but still.
I think Mr. Trump has now clearly said, it's drill, baby, drill. And I think I am only a small person, I'm not a politician. I think for India, it's build, baby, build. We have to build a lot of infrastructure to be able to grow and sustain ourselves. Now, does America play a role in that? 100% yes. I think America would be more than happy to support India's needs for gas. They have enough of it. Yes, Europeans will always pay a little bit more than what Indians can pay or would want to pay. I don't say can pay is the right word, because I think Indians can certainly afford more than Europe sometimes, I see. But I think Europe has got a lot of need because they are totally trying to move away from their Russian dependence. So they are certainly now working with the United States to give them most of their purchase orders. But can India play a role? Of course. Can America give to India? Yes. And I think that is a bridge that we need to align somehow, because there's no other country I see in the world which has the ability to give gas. Of course, I think Russia has a lot of gas, a lot more than probably anybody else. But do they have the ability to deliver those projects? That I think is a big concern in my mind. So if they can deliver those projects, then nothing is keeping them from also selling to India. But we as CrownLNG, we are trying to bridge between US and India.
So now coming to a different issue, there's been a lot of talk about, especially after this DeepSeek thing came from China. So artificial intelligence is the new buzz.
Yes,
and
yes.
To become, India also basically has a vision of becoming a superpower in the field of AI, especially because we have a lot of skilled manpower in terms of IT and related services. But for that you need data centers, and there's a lot of talk about data centers should be, and they consume very high power, and you need a stable source of energy for them. So how do you look at in terms of whether there's been a lot of buzz about that instead of coal-based energy or oil-based energy, it would be better to go for gas-based energy or gas-based power production for data centers. So how do you look at this?
I think it's a complex web of different rules and regulations and things and jurisdictions that these companies exist in. So first of all, looking at the use of computing power for AI, it needs a lot of energy, no question. That's an undisputed fact. Everybody has understood that. The question is, how do you give them uninterrupted supply? Solar and wind cannot do that. You have to back it up with either coal or gas, as we talked about earlier. So these data centers cannot operate 23 hours a day or 16 hours a day, or they cannot do 9 to 5. They have to operate and be available to deliver what they promised to deliver to their customers 24 hours. And they cannot do that without energy. So that is how the energy world is now coming together with the tech world, in a way, to kind of make sure that that tech is available for the consumers 24 hours whenever they need it. And that can only happen with uninterrupted power supply, which can only happen through gas or coal or oil even, but it'll be very expensive to do that. But I think gas certainly plays a huge role, because now the intertwining fact, which is running parallel, is that the big tech companies, they have ESG regulations. So they have to worry about who they're buying that electricity from, or at least that's what I've seen. The approach has been that, do we want to buy something which is creating a lot more carbon, or do we want to buy electricity from someone who's creating less carbon? Ideally, they'd like to buy solar and wind, but it cannot give 24-hour backup, right? So, and these are not small data centers. They're not like a 2 megawatt or a small gen set that you can run in your backyard. These are like large data centers that need proper power plants to service them. And that requires a huge commitment, not only in dollars and technology, but also the capability to have the raw material to run them, either which is coal or gas. So carbon capture has not really picked up a lot in India and other places yet. But as it starts creeping up and ensuring that coal power can actually be delivered more cleanly in India, I think you don't need to do anything else if coal was coming without carbon. But gas certainly reduces that footprint and addresses the issue of being uninterrupted supply. So that's how gas plays a role.
So is CrownLNG looking at this as a business possibility?
We are certainly looking at it. We have, in fact, sometimes we were not looking at it, we were being pushed into it. So, because having, a 7.2 million ton import capability of bringing that much gas into India puts us in a very strong position to be able to supply the power plants or actually build a power plant for these data centers. So we are discussing with different partners at different levels, with people who just need the data centers or they also want to participate in the supply chain itself between gas infrastructure and the power plant infrastructure, to make sure they actually want to be a part of it. We can give it to them, but they want to be so sure that they're a part of it because they want that uninterrupted supply. So we are discussing with different people at different levels. Let's see where it goes.
So going ahead over the next few years, how you are looking at India as a market? How Crown LNG is looking at India as a market? What are your future plans?
I think when we look at a market, especially countries like India, we've divided India into 5 different segments. So we look at power plants, we look at fertilizer plants, we look at petrochemical and industry, we look at city gas distribution, for home needs, and then last but not the least, we look at the transportation. So if you look at all these 5, we have to prioritize which segment or which industry of this is going to be buying product for a longer term to allow us to have, not keep changing our customers every 2 or 5 years. And secondly, which is going to be able to afford the fluctuations in gas in the international market. So when we look at the power plants, that becomes a bit of a challenge because power plants work on kind of strict power purchase agreements. So if the power price of gas is, let's say, X dollars, they can operate. When it go X plus 1, X plus 2, they say, okay, we cannot buy gas because we will not be running profitably. There's no point. And then when you look at fertilizer plants, I think the local Indian gas gets a priority there, which is, I can understand why, because you need the fertilizer to grow food, and we need to feed 1.4 billion people. But when you look at CGD and we look at transport and we look at the industrial sector, that's probably where we are targeting our primary distribution.
So if we look at the Indian scenario, so how much is the capacity of your Kakinada plant?
So it's about 7.2 million metric tons per annum.
And how, again from a layman's perspective, so you'll get basically the gas in liquefied form.
Right.
You will basically process it there, and then it will be reconverted into gas,
Right.
and then it will be supplied to your client. So how this supply will be done basically?
So this supply will be done, so the way it works is that India has a grid system. So right, if let's say there is a client of mine 300 kilometers away, so that plant is connected to the grid. So the amount of product that plant will suck out of the grid, we will add to the grid to replace it. So that person gets what they need, and that's how we keep our metering stations synchronized.
So this grid is run by the government?
Yes, so mostly GAIL runs most of the pipelines, but there are pipelines which are privately owned or state owned. And like there's one of them which is the east-west connector running from Kakinada and connecting to Gujarat. That is actually originally, I think it was installed and built by Reliance to service its gas requirements from the KG Basin to its refinery. That was bought by a Canadian fund which is called Brookfield. I think they own that huge, that's a major pipeline network of India. And we would probably like to connect into it to be able to supply to the other customers along the way. But there's also a GAIL connection available which is being built from Kakinada into Andhra Pradesh, into Orissa and the national grid. So we will have 2 options to do it. Apart from that, can we build our own network to do it? Yes, we would have a option to do that.
So you are here for India Energy Week.
That is correct.
And so how do you look at this India Energy Week, in the sense that is there a growing consciousness about, because I've been a journalist for almost about 3 decades, and I see a lot of consciousness, a lot of awareness about energy now. We never used to talk about this, such kind of podcasts or conversations were unimaginable. They were considered to be, the typical boardroom stuff.
Yeah.
So, and
normally people, it's granted. You press a button, the light comes on.
Yeah.
That's all their mind for energy is.
So how do you look at basically events like India Energy Week, for which you are here? How is it helping basically India to address its energy concerns?
I think that's a very good question, because it's not about gas. So I think India, in order to have needs for 1.4 billion people and a growing economy, they need to have so many levels of conversations with so many different companies globally. It's not possible to have or travel to each of these countries. So when you put together an event like this, everybody comes together. And when everybody comes together, they put their heads together and say, okay, how do we do it? And you're not only thinking about gas or coal, you're also thinking about hydrogen. You're looking for people, you're looking for skill sets, you're looking for technology transfers. So I think this India Energy Week is a wholesome idea, and I think it's a great event to connect India to the world. More importantly, give an opportunity for the world to connect to India.
So CrownLNG is also putting up a basically stall there.
Yes.
And so one last question which I wanted to ask was that because yours is a multinational corporation and you work with different governments also. So what kind of ease of doing business companies like yours expect when they come to India? Of course, there is bureaucracy, and there is red tapeism also. There are certain issues basically, and then there are certain issues with legacies. So, but what kind of expectations is there from because you have to work in a federal structure here. You have to work with the state government, and you have to work with the central government, and then there are local bodies also. And then we have a very robust civil society also, which often, especially when it comes to energy projects.
Yes.
So, so what kind of what would be the expectation of a reputed company, a company with legacy like yours, from basically the policy apparatus in India?
I think I can talk about it for the whole day because it's not an easy question to answer. But I think if you ask me one thing that it really kind of riles me up, it angers me, is they talk about ease of doing business, but it is not easy, first of all, in plain and simple words. I think it's the basic thought process of understanding that you have to build infrastructure like gas and energy infrastructure before businesses would decide to come in. The thought is in the bureaucracy that I've experienced is totally opposite. Their think is, why do we need this? There is no industry there, why do you need this? And the argument is, you don't build this, that'll never come. And I think educating those bureaucrats, I don't know if they do that on purpose. There's no reason for them to do it on purpose. I think they just don't understand how to grow India maybe. You have to grow India with infrastructure. You cannot grow without it. I mean, I will use examples of people who have built these infrastructure. I'd not, legally my lawyers would say I cannot use their name, so I won't. But they are very smart companies which have built this infrastructure in India already. And look at the industry developing and thriving now, growing there. I think Gujarat should be an example for India. The first LNG terminal of India came up in Gujarat. A lot of industry has prospered there. And look at the other states. Anybody who does not have gas has a hard time doing it, pulling bigger industries, which will automatically make smaller ancillary industries, and it becomes a whole ecosystem. But energy is the seed for everything. Do I see ease of operation? I don't. Can it be made easier? Yes. I think the simple attitude shift is, instead of saying and looking at all the problems in a project, you have to look how to do it. I think it's just an attitude shift.
Probably I think probably induction of more technocrats would be probably.
It's a good suggestion. Yes, that should be a very good start. No question about it. Somebody who understands the technicality.
Because unfortunately, the PSUs also, which are basically which play an important role in the energy sector. So more than often they are headed by basically Indian Administrative Service officers who have a general basically kind of a administrative knowledge about things, but these are very technical issues, and there are
and I don't have a problem. We go through so many countries. We operate in now 29 countries, and we're building projects in about 6 or 7 of them. And apart from that, we're meeting with ministers, bureaucrats in different countries. What I notice in India, which is different, is and you'll laugh at it, but I want to share with the audience as well. Let's say I were to put a 5,000 page submission into a department. So the 5,000 page submission goes in, and this is some other countries. They will look at it and they'll come back with you with 150 clarifications, or they say, okay, this is an issue in this 5,000 page submission. These 150 questions you need to respond to. So we go back to our engineering, we resolve all the questions that they need. We go back, they review it, they come back with 42 questions. Just using that as an example. And then we go from 42 to 6, and then from 6 to 0, and we get our file done. India is very unique. You give them a 5,000 page submission, the guy comes back with 250 questions, you respond to the 250, that guy has moved on, somebody else came in, and he's now giving you 600 questions. So the guy who's coming in doesn't trust the operations of his own department, right? Basically. He's basically saying the guy working before him is a fool. They're both IAS or whatever department they are. So I would expect the departments, in order to do that, do not question your own department. Because question us. We are here to answer that for you. We're building a project. We'd like to convince you that we're doing something right and for the interest of the country and the society, and we don't want to create any environmental hazards. But at the same time, don't do this to us, because we have a limited time and a limited capital to do a project and allocate it to us. Now, if you don't do it in that, we'll walk away. And that's what happens to a lot of projects. So in order for India to grow, that ease of reference has to start from that governance that has to be put into place, where a second guy coming in does not question his predecessor's assessment. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes a perfect sense. And one last, though I said that the previous question was the last one, but as you are a non-resident Indian, right?
Yes.
And you moved out of India when you were 16 and a half for your studies. So how do you see over the last 10 years, you're a businessman also.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see, is there, especially after the Modi government has come to power, so there's a lot of buzz about, now Indians are being looked at in a different way throughout the world. Mm-hmm. So what has been your experience?
I'll take this opportunity to salute to Mr. Modi. After his coming in, things have become much better. No question about it. Can it be more better? Of course. We will never be satisfied as humans. But on the international scale, I think we have gained a much higher level of respect and honor, which was there, but people still treated us differently. Now I think it's enjoyable to see it.
So on that note, we'll end our conversation. And Mr. Kataria, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule. And it was great having conversation with you, because you have demystified, a very crucial sector for our viewers. And so we'll be back with another conversation soon. And if you liked the video, please share it, like it, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon for notification. And if you have any questions for Mr. Kataria, you can post it in the comment box of our YouTube video, and we'll take it to them. So thank you so much, Mr. Kataria.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.